This is Walmart's giant 13.2-inch tablet, and it's full of some cool surprises. Hey everyone, Retro Tech Dad here, and as you can see, I'm back with another purchase from Walmart.com, which shipped here in this brown mailer envelope. So let's tear this open together and see what I've got inside. In a recent video, I covered Walmart's on-branded 8.1-inch Core tablet for 2026, and there was a lot of interest from viewers in the comments section to take a look at the much larger offering from this new wave of 2026 tablets from ONN. So what I've got here is a hilariously large box that probably doesn't convey well on camera, but this is the ONN 13.2-inch Tablet Pro, which is, what do you know, powered by Android. And given that we've got some specs on the front of the package, let's quickly talk about what you're actually getting here with this tablet. As I mentioned before, ONN is Walmart's in-house electronics brand, and this is one of 4 new tablets that they've released for 2026. I've covered the 8.1-inch model recently on the channel, and so now here we are with the 13.2-inch model that features a resolution of 2400 by 1600, which, like the 8.1-inch model, is a 3:2 aspect ratio display, and the specific panel supports up to a 120Hz refresh rate with about a 218 ppi and up to 500 nits of brightness. This display is pretty nice looking with a decent amount of sharpness and clarity despite the larger panel size, and provides plenty of brightness, at least for indoor usage. I really do like that this is a 3:2 aspect ratio display, and definitely makes it stand out a bit in this specific larger form factor. Under the hood, the 13.2-inch model is powered by a Mediatek chipset, and just like the 8.1-inch model, it isn't clearly mentioned on the product page which chipset this tablet is specifically using, but I can confirm that what we get here is the Dimensity 7300 that features 8 cores with clock speeds up to 2.6 GHz and a Mali G615 for graphics. It'll be interesting to see how things fare with this chipset in terms of compatibility with some of the more demanding gaming that I typically like to test here for the channel. We do get a fairly generous 8GB of LPDDR5X RAM and then 256GB of internal storage, but most importantly, we do have the ability to expand storage with the microSD slot that is available on the tablet. As is pretty typical for these lower range tablets, the front-facing 8-megapixel camera and then the rear-facing 13-megapixel cameras are nothing amazing, but at least serviceable for those that may want to use them for video calls. On the package itself, it does state that we get up to 15 hours of battery life. There's no mention of the specific testing conditions anywhere here, so I can't tell you for sure what that might include. The tablet also features IP54 dust and water resistance, which, as it states, does provide limited dust intrusion and is resistant to water splashing from any direction. We've also got 4 speakers, 2 on each side of the tablet when in the landscape orientation, that support DTS:X Ultra certified audio, and these speakers are awesome. And it's definitely welcome that they are making use of the larger form factor to pack additional speakers for an enhanced audio experience. This is definitely great for media consumption, which, by the way, the 13.2-inch model does have support for Widevine L1. We also get Android 16 out of the box, and according to the user guide, 3 years of security updates and at least 1 update to the next Android version, as well as a 1-year limited warranty. Finally, I purchased this from Walmart.com for $288, and it does seem to be readily available on their website as well as in stores. So what's actually inside the box? And I'm going to go ahead and take a peek inside, and what we've got here is an included Folio case that is already attached to the tablet inside the box. And yes, every one of these ONN 13.2-inch tablets include this Folio case as part of the package, which definitely is a nice touch and adds some additional value to what we're getting here for the price. It's nothing fancy, and I've now been using the tablet for about 3 weeks and find the case to be just okay, but will most likely be serviceable for most. It does feel a bit cheap, and on the back we have 2 notches that help stand the tablet up at 2 different angles. The Folio also wakes the tablet up when you lift the front cover, and at the end of the day, I'm glad that something is included at all. On the front of the tablet, we have a giant insert that once again details some of the specs we already discussed, including some other features that we've not yet discussed, and we will in just a moment. And removing this, we finally reveal the massive 13.2-inch tablet. It's nice and thin, but definitely has some heft to it. The tablet is made with an all-aluminum chassis and is available only in one color that you see here, which is black. It's definitely a fingerprint magnet, but I imagine for most users it will probably remain in its Folio case. Oh yeah, we've got the return of the super wide quick start guide like we saw with the 8.1 inch model, and it includes some good tips to get started with the tablet, and I definitely recommend reading it. And then there's a tiny little envelope which appears to have additional tips for the stylus, and I guess it's now time to reveal the next cool thing that this package gets you, which is a stylus, and this model does have stylus support, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. We've got a USB-C to USB-C cable, and then of course, one serving of our tasty seasoning packet. Okay, so let's power on this giant slab and just take a look at the out-of-the-box experience, which as we can see is powered by Android, and specifically Android 16. The one thing I do appreciate with these ONN tablets is they are essentially vanilla experiences of Android and typically don't have much preloaded on them, with the exception of the one additional Walmart app, but outside of that, expect to find the typical Google apps and then not much else. So there's actually a few standout features with this massive tablet that's slightly unusual to see, but also surprising at this price point and for this segment. We've talked about the included Folio case, which as I said is nothing amazing, but it's serviceable, and best of all, it's just included here with the package. Now another feature that I was not expecting to find here and I thought was super cool was the extended display, which lets you use this massive tablet as a portable monitor, and that's a pretty clever use case for a tablet this size, as it now serves multiple use cases. And I don't know if my viewers are like me, but I do have a few portable monitors that I use in various scenarios. In fact, I use one right in front of me on a shelf as a viewer for my overhead camera. I think this is a nice, unexpected bonus since not only can this serve as an Android tablet, but let's say you're on the road and then you want to hook up your handheld, for example, to a larger display like this, so you can kick back and relax. I thought that this is a pretty neat feature to have, but I did say that this is a bonus since while it's cool to have in a pinch, unfortunately I have found that compatibility varies wildly based on the device you're trying to connect to it, since it seems to be quite picky about what will work and what won't, even on devices that I know have worked with other displays I have around here. Not only that, but there's definitely some type of delay going on here, and for example, I hooked up my Odin 3 handheld and then tried New Star GP just as a quick test, and if I slow down the speed of the video, you can see the delay from when I move the joystick to when it moves on the tablet's screen. So at least in terms of a gaming use case, it's a bit of a bummer, but it's still cool if you want a multi-monitor setup for your laptop, or perhaps hooking up something to a portable display in a pinch. Now, of course, the big one here for many, and mentioned by my viewers as well, is the stylus support. And not only does this have proper stylus support using the Universal Stylus Initiative 2.0, or USI 2.0 standard, ONN has gone ahead and included a stylus right in the box to get you going. Again, this is not one of those type of pens that have a special tip to work on touchscreens. This is a proper stylus with pressure sensitivity, tilt support, but sadly this one does not charge wirelessly with the tablet, but you can use the tablet itself to charge with the USB-C port, and it does stay on there magnetically. I've had viewers mention that the stylus support is a very appealing feature for its price point and size. And while I'm definitely not an artist, I did mess around with this to see how it performed using apps like Clip Studio Paint, and I think this is pretty neat. Android also does a solid job teaching you about how to use your stylus within the operating system, and I was blown away by its accuracy when it came to my handwriting and recognition. It's a pretty cool feature. So an important note to make is that the stylus does not work in the 120Hz mode, but I don't think that's a massive deal breaker since for artists you're not dealing with fast-paced motion, and it also helps in terms of battery life for the tablet, so I'm okay with this trade-off. Now once you switch over to 90Hz, which is the default mode for this tablet, the pen will just automatically connect and work without the need to mess with Bluetooth or anything else thanks to that USI 2.0 support. Now I really apologize for my awful art. I apparently did not watch enough Bob Ross growing up, and this right here is not a happy accident. Thankfully, you don't need to be an artist to appreciate the stylus support, and of course this can be used for things like note-taking, and maybe even some Nintendo DS emulation. So as always, before we head on over to the gaming section, let's just quickly talk about telescopic controller options, and given that this is a massive 13.2-inch tablet, it's probably not much of a surprise that there's really not a whole lot of options, especially ones that just work out of the box with this. I've found that the tried and true Gamesir G8 Plus is probably the best option for this tablet, since not only is it an option I've covered countless times here on the channel, but it's one that's been around a while, it's priced decently, and it supports Bluetooth so we can use it in any orientation. And most importantly, it can handle the width of the 13.2-inch display for this ONN tablet. I did test some other options including the massive Razer Kishi XL, and it was just off by a few millimeters, which is a bummer, and so we're back to that G8 Plus as just the solid overall option that also has a lot of cool 3D prints available for it, including a support bracket like you see on my controller here, which helps gives it better stability, support, and just makes it feel a bit nicer and more cohesive when attached to this honkin' beast. Alright, so let's finally get to some gaming, and we're going to start out with some native Android gaming first, and this is an area that the extra power of the Dimensity 7300 over something like that Snapdragon 685 that we saw in the ONN 8.1-inch core tablet will be much appreciated, because the Dimensity 7300 here will be able to open up the doors to far more of the available library on the Google Play Store, which is an area that its smaller sibling suffered with. Destiny Rising was a game that didn't work at all on that tablet, and so that is one example of where we can access more of the Play Store library. Now, the Dimensity 7300 is not a high-end chip, but it will do quite well for native Android games thanks to the optimization of the software, and so a lot of popular games like Genshin Impact, which runs at a low preset and very close to or at 60 frames per second, which means we have room to adjust settings, and it's definitely much better performance than we saw with that Snapdragon 685. The same goes for Wuthering Waves, and for that game I used the recommended balanced settings, which had a frame rate target of 30 frames per second, and the experience was solid. The story holds true for essentially all of the other games that I've tested, including Warframe, which is performing a lot better here than it did on that smaller tablet with the Snapdragon 685. I'm running Warframe at the native resolution of the panel, so we get a much nicer and sharper image with low settings at 30 frames per second, and again, we have room to adjust as you prefer. Call of Duty Mobile is another game that I tested, and here I was able to make use of the 90 frames per second option, which defaults to low settings, but the performance seemed very nice and smooth, and I do apologize that I had to take the frame counter off since it didn't play nice when I was trying to use that and my Xbox controller. Finally, for one last game, I wanted to check out The Division, which is a game I spent a lot of time with a few years ago on PC, and so it's cool to check out this mobile take on the franchise, and for this I have the game set to medium settings and likewise runs very well here. I think if you're looking for a big screen experience with a tablet and enjoy a lot of what the Play Store offers in terms of gaming, this tablet should serve you quite well in that department, but just be aware that the Dimensity 7300 might start to show signs of aging sooner rather than later. By the way, this video should be live during Google's mega game sale on the Play Store, and I highly recommend checking out these games as they're all well worth owning and they're going for just 10 cents right now. And I know I used it as an opportunity to fill in some games missing in my collection. And of course, we can't forget about emulation. And first things first, with this massive screen and a 3:2 aspect ratio, I had to quickly try out some Game Boy Advance emulation, which used the same aspect ratio as this tablet, and it makes for an incredible way to experience the vast library of what the Game Boy Advance offers. But I don't think there was any doubt that this tablet would have issues with this platform. And so let's take it up a notch and check out a round of PlayStation platforms, starting first with the PlayStation Portable. And with that extra power of the Dimensity 7300, PSP has proven to be a solid performer here, and we have enough overhead that we can enjoy upscaling as much as 8 times the native resolution of the PlayStation Portable for a 4K resolution, which given the display on the ONN is obviously not needed, but still cool to see that we can push the resolution, at least when we're talking about lighter games like Loco Roco. But when it comes to more demanding games like everyone's favorite benchmark game, God of War Chains of Olympus, we're still looking at about 4 times the native resolution of PSP, which is the equivalent to a 1080p resolution, and this is a very good thing as we can definitely enjoy much of what the PlayStation Portable library offers, and with upscaling thrown into the mix. Unfortunately, it's not quite as impressive when we're talking about PlayStation 2 emulation using Nether SX2, and this is where we start to see some of the limitations of that Dimensity 7300, but I don't want this to sound worse than it does, and the thing is, a good portion of the PlayStation 2 library, which consists of thousands of games, will be playable here, especially when you stick to using PAL region ROMs. And with that, you can even get away with a bit of upscaling like I've done here for Crash Twinsanity. I do wish we had just a little more power on hand, and God of War 2 is a good showcase of what I mean, since here I'm using the PAL version of the game, and on its own at native resolution, it sorta hangs on at that 50 frames per second we are trying to target, with dips here and there. But if you're willing to tinker a little bit and make a small adjustment like I've done here to the EE cycle rate in system settings by changing it to 1, we can help the game out so it can stay on target. So what that means for PlayStation 2 is that again, while many games will not require tinkering, you still will need to do it for the more demanding games, and again with the limitations of the emulator itself and the power we have with Dimensity 7300, just keep your expectations in check. The good news is that more is playable here than with that 8.1-inch model we looked at a few weeks ago. And speaking of being more playable, we can even get away with some very light PlayStation 3 emulation, and if you've been here long enough, you know that I couldn't resist, and of course I tested my tried and true Resogun. But for this I'm using a 75% resolution scale, and I'd say that performance is pretty solid, and the same goes for other lighter style games for the PlayStation 3 like Virtua Fighter 5, and so it's a fun thing to experiment with for those that want to push the hardware a little bit. So let's now switch on over to the Nintendo side and check out GameCube and Wii emulation with the excellent Dolphin emulator that is available straight from the Google Play Store. And because GameCube and Wii typically fare better than PlayStation 2 on most devices, I'm happy to say that the same holds true here for both GameCube and Wii. And not only are we able to run games quite well here for either platform, I was able to push 2 times the native resolution for both platforms, including some of the more demanding games like F-Zero GX and Sonic Colors, which both were able to handle that 2x upscaling without issue. And so I'd say that a good portion of the GameCube and Wii library will do very well here, and definitely more so than what we saw with the PlayStation 2, at least in terms of performance and upscaling. And because of the upscaling, the games look really nice on this big display. Unfortunately, something like Wii U using the CMU emulator is going to be a bit too much for the Dimensity 7300. And so outside of the absolute lightest games, don't expect too much, and certainly not something like Breath of the Wild, considering even a game like DuckTales Remastered was having trouble staying consistently at 60 frames per second using a lower resolution of 960 by 544. And this is partly due to the lack of the maturity for the emulator itself, but this is more like PlayStation 3 emulation, where it's just fun to explore, and even something like Fast Racing Neo performed better than I actually expected. Finally, for the last Nintendo platform, let's check out some Switch emulation using the Eden emulator, and I think it's safe to say that based on what we've seen, Switch emulation is going to be reserved for the absolute lightest games as well, and I did try a combination of settings including a 0.5x resolution, which is pretty brutal on a screen this large, and sadly many lighter games like Golf Story were even having issues here, and so really games like Celeste, which does run at native resolution here, seem to fare decently, but again, consider this a fun bonus, and given how many games are available for the Switch, more might be playable here than expected. So while emulation results are pretty solid, I'd say that PC gaming using things like Gamehub and Gamenative will definitely be more of a mixed bag, and that's not necessarily due to the lack of power, even though the Dimensity 7300 is not a high-end chip by any means. The biggest issue here with the Dimensity 7300 is just the lack of driver support like we see for Snapdragon chipsets, and even lower powered Snapdragon chips generally just fare better for this specifically compared to the Dimensity counterparts. As such, I'd say don't expect much when it comes to PC gaming here with the Dimensity 7300, and while there's plenty that you can get to work, given that we're talking about the PC library which consists of thousands of games, it's definitely going to be a lot of trial and error, and for the most part, you'll just come across games that simply don't work or have very poor performance. Now, of course, for my viewers that know me well, that didn't necessarily stop me, and I still had fun exploring and experimenting with the ONN 13.2-inch, since I just love seeing how far we can potentially go with this gigantic budget tablet from Walmart. And there were some nice surprises, as you've probably seen on screen, like Megabox, which is not only a fairly recent release, but one that I was shocked ran at all, and as decently as it did. Now, despite this, performance isn't still incredible, but it's still cool to see nonetheless. And so while I'd say the tablet started out strong for gaming with Android games, we can see how it starts to falter a bit as we climb up the ladder. But that's not all of the gaming use cases for something like this, and generally I always love to check out how game streaming fares on these tablets, especially streaming from your local PC, using the awesome combination of Apollo and Artemis, which is also a great way to make use of the 120Hz refresh rate panel available to us on this tablet. I will say I went in not sure of what to expect, since in my experience, Dimensity chips typically don't fare as well as its Snapdragon counterparts, but I was pleasantly surprised here. This is not necessarily close to the best I've tested here on the channel, but at the native resolution of the tablet and streaming at 120 frames per second, I was getting about 12 to 14 milliseconds decoding time, which is good enough that for most it won't be noticeable, and the experience is still enjoyable. It's certainly not as good as the 8.1-inch core tablet with its Snapdragon chip, but this is pretty close, and I do love having this massive screen for streaming, especially when you can just prop it up with its Folio case and then connect a Bluetooth controller to it for a pretty neat portable setup. And so we've reached the end of yet another video, and this massive tablet is a very interesting device since for an everyday user looking for a big screen experience with some nice features, this is definitely one that stands out for various reasons. It's not perfect, much like its smaller sibling, the 8.1-inch core tablet that we looked at earlier, but depending on your use case, it might just be enough to serve your needs. but be mindful of some of the limitations. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed exploring this massive slab with me, and until the next one, as always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.